Charlie Chaplin has been one of the best comedians the world has ever seen. So today we will analyze one of his best works known as The Great Dictator. The Great Dictator, Charlie Chaplin's masterful satire of Adolf Hitler, began filming in September 1939, right at the start of World War II. By the time it was released in 1940, the Axis had been formed and the Nazis were already occupying much of France. It was, in other words, a strange moment to be making a comedy about Adolf Hitler, even a satire holding him to account, and even one in which Chaplin himself, who was at that point of time one of the most famous movie stars in the world, famous for playing the ambling, lovable little tramp, took on the role of Hitler. His likeness, the little tramp with that curt moustache and oddly compact face of his, had already become a visual reference for cartoonists lampooning Hitler in the press, and he was already on the Nazis' radar. The 1934 Nazi volume, The Jews Are Looking at You, referred to him as a disgusting Jewish acrobat. Chaplin wasn't Jewish, but he was frequently rumored to be, and when he visited Berlin in 1931, he was mobbed by German fans, proving that his popularity could surpass even the growing ideological boundaries of a nascent Nazi Germany, hence their hatred. Chaplin was aware of all the fact that he and Hitler were born only 4 days apart in April of 1889, that they had both risen out of poverty, and that they had enough points of biographical comparison. Let's not overstate their similarities. One of these men would go on to make the world laugh, and the other would go on to start a world war and facilitate the Holocaust. Humorously, the split would come to be echoed in The Great Dictator. Chaplin does double duty, playing the movie's twin character roles. One, the character of Adenoid Hinkel, is a Hitler spoof by way of a short-tempered and a powerful personality, a dictator of the fictional town Thomania. And in the opposing corner, Chaplin offers a variation on his classic little tramp, a Jewish barber who saves a high-ranking officer's life in World War I, and after a plane accident and years of recovery in the hospital, wakes up to the seeds of World War II being sown in his country. The Great Dictator is a classic for a reason. It's startling in its depiction of violence, which stands out less for their outright brutality than for how memorably they depict the Nazis' betrayal of everyday humanity. And it's renowned as well as for its resourceful and original humor, which combines Chaplin at his most incisive and balletic with raucous display of the verbal wit. The Great Dictator understands Hitler as a performer, as an orator wielding language like the unifying, galvanizing power that it is. But it also understands him as a psyche. This, of course, means it's full of what feel like sophomoric jokes, gags in which Hitler's insecurities, his thirst for influence, his ideological inconsistencies, and zealous dependency on loyalty come under fire. It isn't a psychological portrait, but nor it is so simple as a funhouse treatment of the coming war, all punchline and distortion. Comparing most comedians' work on Chaplin's result is an unfair fight. What matters are the things we can all still learn from Chaplin's work, down to the fact that it so completely and unabashedly honors and toys with the public's sense of who he is. This wouldn't be nearly as interesting a movie if the Jewish barber hadn't so readily recalled the little tramp. But because of this familiarity, The Great Dictator feels much the way movies like Modern Times did. Like a story about a travail of an everyman who suddenly, with no preparation, launched headlong into machinery too great, too complex, too utterly beyond him, for it not to result in comic hijinks. That's how Barber's first scene out of the hospital, as beautifully staged and timed by Chaplin, feel like watching the little tramp turn a corner and walk, completely unaware, into a world war. He sees Jew written on his barber shop, but because he is an amnesiac just released from the hospital, he has no idea why it's there and starts to wash it away. This is illegal, of course, and when the Nazis try to tell them, so he, thinking they are run of the mill brutish anti Semites, douses them with paint and runs away. Much of the humor, at least in the clearly marked ghetto where the barber flees, play out this way: a terrifying game of comic irony, in which what the barber doesn't know both empowers and threatens to kill him. The Hitler scenes, by contrast, are a ballet. The highlight must, of course, be a scene of Hitler alone, having just renewed his faith in his plan to take over the world, dancing with an inflated globe of the planet, bouncing it off his bum, posing like a pin-up on his desk. As the globe floats airlessly skyward, you can't help but laugh. But that laughter doesn't mute the brooding danger of it. You see the globe, the case with which he lifts it up, manipulates it, makes a game of it, and realizes that this is precisely what a dictator wants. It's a childlike vision from his perspective of his own power. The great dictator's famous climax finds these two men merging somewhat into one. It's a rousing speech ostensibly delivered by the Jewish barber who has been confused by Hinkel by the Nazis and is called upon to speak to the masses. The speech makes a case for humanity in the face of grave evil. We think too much and feel too little, Chaplin says. More than machinery, we need humanity. More than cleverness, we need kindness and gentleness. You'll recognize this theme. More than machinery, we need humanity throughout Chaplin's work, and it rings especially true here. Chaplin emerges fully human, as himself breaking free of the film's satirical trappings to deliver one from the heart. It's surprising, the great dictator tone to this point never feels so earnest. From the vintage of 1940, Chaplin's couldn't quite see where the war would take us. And it remains the case that some of the film plays oddly, but all the more insightfully for it today. The Great Dictator is a film made in a cloud of relative ignorance, yet look at how much it says, how far it goes. It makes it hard to make excuses for films made since, which often have the benefit of hindsight, yet little of substance to say about what they see in their rear view. We know much more about Hitler today than we did in 1940. Why should we let anyone get away with saying less? Why shouldn't we ask any question? Why shouldn't we ask question to the ruling parties of the country?